Everybody hear me okay? Thumbs up? Okay, perfect. So welcome everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. Today's presentation is regarding active supervision around building a culture of safety in your classrooms. There's a lot of information that will be specific to pre-K classrooms, but knowing that not everybody is in a pre-K classroom who's joined us today, there's a lot of information that you can take away that you can utilize in any sort of school setting. So that's a good thing. So let's get on with the show. So first we're going to talk about what active supervision is. Active supervision is a whole team approach that offers simple strategies for staff to be mindful of nurturing relationships with children while keeping them engaged and safe. And we do this by a number of different ways, by knowing each child's ability, establishing clear and simple rules and boundaries, being aware of potential safety issues and hazards, focusing on the positive always, and teaching children safe and appropriate use of equipment and materials. I'm going to move my pictures here. These include effective strategies that foster positive communication and a culture of safety through focused attention and intentional observation. And it's a guide to creating a learning environment where children are able to explore safely. Okay, there are 6 strategies that active supervision encompasses. These strategies allow children in a school setting safe exploration of their environments, both in the classroom and out of the classroom. So the strategies we're going to talk about are environmental setup, positioning of staff, scanning and counting, listening, anticipating behaviors, and engagement and redirection. We're actually going to go through each one of these 6 separately. And if I'm talking too fast, let me know, because I am a little bit nervous. This is my first time doing this with this many people, and I do tend to talk fast. So I apologize if that's the case. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is designing environments. So this is, some of this is specific to pre-K classrooms, but environments need to be set up always so that children can be seen at all times. So in a pre-K classroom, that means that the furniture is child-sized and usually around waist height. Your shelving should be around waist height. If you have older children, that will change a little bit. Small spaces in the classroom that are clutter-free, and larger spaces that are designated for clear play areas. Spaces are set up in a way that educators can hear and observe children at all times. Most important things, in my opinion, to remember are that blind spots and hiding places are very easily found by children in classrooms. So blind spots being around corners, every room is set up differently, not just the furniture, but the layout of the room and the shape of the room. So around corners, behind furniture, hiding on lower shelves, anything that's covered with a curtain, or if you're not using the block area, sometimes you'll cover that with a curtain. Those are shelves and things you can't see kids when they're behind them, so those become hiding spaces. And they find them very quickly. So if you can't rearrange your classroom and you're unable to move these spaces or make them a little safer, just please be aware that children know they're there. And so when you're scanning and looking at places, you're mindful of looking at the blind spots and the hiding spots that are in your classroom.
Marcy, can I add something there real quick?
Yes, please.
So Christina mentioned in the chat box that environments, of course, we want them to be inviting to all students and welcoming to all students. And I think that points that Marcy has up here on the screen are crucial. And one way, a great strategy that we recommend teachers to sort of evaluate their space for these pieces that Marcy has up is to set up your room the way that you think is an appropriate way for your students, whether that's 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, first grade, second grade, it doesn't matter. Set up your space to how it meets your needs. And then before a student ever even sets foot into that room, take a minute to go out in the hallway, turn on your camera and your video, and align it on, your body to about the height of the child. So if you're working with 4-year-olds, your video is going to be down around like hip level, right? If you're a little bit older students that you're working with, it might be a little higher. And just enter your room with your camera recording and walk around it, scan it, stand in one place, look, turn left, turn right, walk in and out of the space and around easels and around furniture and around cabinets and whatever you have for equipment. And then, take your time, do it slowly, and then watch it and see it from the perspective of your students' height and their sort of vision level, so that you can determine if the furniture is truly at the appropriate height. Is your spaces that might be smaller, are they clutter-free? Looking at it from your angle, they might be checking off each of these bullets, but then when you bring it down to the child's view, you might see something that is in the way or is distracting, or might not be quite set up the way you had it planned. So that's just something that we recommend a lot of pre-K teachers. It's certainly applicable in other grades as well.
Thank you. That was a really good addition. Okay, so we're going to move on to staffing. So the first thing we're going to talk about around staffing is positioning and zoning. Zoning is a really important way of being intentional of placing staff in a classroom or outside or in a cafeteria, whatever area that you're in with children. And so what the most important thing to be mindful of is that everybody is aware of the plan who's in the classroom, all of the adults, and that that there's a plan in place that is followed. So you want to be mindful of the times of day and where you are, what's going on in the classroom, if they're in specials, if you're walking down the hall, being on the playground, that sort of thing. So arrival, departure, meals, transitions, toileting, if it's outside the classroom, and centers times are probably the most important. Being sure that staff can see and hear children always. It's one of the most important things. Don't assume that other people are seeing the children if you're not, because it's possible that they are not also. Being mindful of clear pathways to student areas. So that's knowing how to position yourself so that if you're in a different area than children that might need support, you have a clear way to get to them. So if you're in dramatic play and the block area is maybe a place where children maybe are having a little added support needed, that you have a clear path to get there. You're not climbing over shelves, you're not walking all the way around the classroom, everything is kind of laid out clearly. And then staying close to children who may need added support. And we're going to talk about getting to know your children around that in a little bit later. But children who need added support, you'll generally know fairly quickly. And it's not about necessarily being a one-on-one with them, but it really is about being in a similar area if you know that situations may happen that you might need to step in on. And then staff are in separate areas inside and out. And this is one of my favorite ones because generally inside a classroom during centers time, staff are generally separated. There's a lot of activity going on. What's most important though is when you think about being outside on the playground and positioning and zoning of staff, a lot of times staff congregate. Children kind of do their own thing, they're running around the playground, that sort of thing. And I've seen it a number of times where staff generally, it's kind of a break time. What's really important to remember is that this is an optimal time for interactions and engagement with children. It's not just centers time, it's not just large group time. And if we are supervising mindfully, then we are engaging with the children on the playground and not with other adults as needed. And the other thing around that is that a lot of schools have more than one class on the playground at a time. So if adults are in one area and children are in another area, it's really hard to supervise them when there's 32 kids on the playground. Moving on to scanning and counting. So as we said, staff are always able to account for the students. Never assume that somebody else is accounting for your children. Continuous scanning of play areas inside and out. And so being mindful to look around the classroom every few minutes, 30 seconds to a minute. Just if you're working with a small group or you're working individually with a student, just lifting your head up, looking around the classroom, looking at the different areas, making sure all the children are accounted for, making sure this, everybody's getting along and there's nothing to step in on. Is really important. And just as an aside, one of my favorite things, so we're doing at the end of our sessions, we will be doing a hour-long overview of the class observation. And so I kind of wanted to pull that into this just a little bit. But when you are scanning the classroom, it's a perfect time for positive interactions and to point out the positives that children are doing. And so the rule is, I think, 3 positives to 1 sort of negative or redirection. So if you're looking around the classroom and you're noticing that Nicole today is using a really nice indoor voice and she's using her little mouse voice, it's a really great time to call that out and you know, call out the positive. Kids enjoy it, and they really, it's really positively reinforcing those behaviors that you want to see. Okay, so continuous counting of children. I've lost my place here. Obviously, counting heads, very important during transition times. It's very chaotic during transitions, and so counting prior to leaving the room, when everybody's lining up, counting while you're in line, counting when you get to where you're going, making sure, again, that every child is accounted for all the time. And then communicating with other adults when leaving the classroom and also in the classroom. But a lot of times we're asked to take a child to special services, or we're asked to go outside, maybe the bathroom's outside the room, or we need to get the lunch cart or whatever it may be. It's really, really important that every other adult in that classroom knows that that child is leaving. So if a therapist comes to get a child, everybody needs to communicate that we know where that child is going. And sometimes that does not happen. So it's
Ma'am, I'm busy.
Remember when Di said, like,
okay. Are there anything in the chat room around that?
Nope, not so far. Although I do just so appreciate this reminder, because part of Marcy and I's roles at the department is not just always being at the department, right? So we spend a lot of time out in the field, in classrooms, in schools, with teachers, with students. It's truly the perk of our job. Not all content specialists or all DOE employees have that advantage. So we don't take that lightly. It's definitely something we appreciate and look forward to. Of course, right now with the closures and the way our world is for our youngest students, it's not possible. So definitely missing out on that. But when we are able to go back to our brick and mortar schools and visit with teachers and meet all of you, this whole idea around being mindful of your staff and your students and communicating is really, really crucial. I know I'm speaking to the choir. That's not news to anybody. However, I know how much teachers love interacting, not just with their students, but with each other as well. And often outdoor time, transitions, lunch, meals is a time when teachers try and utilize that. And I think this slide here that Marcy's showing us is a good reminder that we need that adult interaction, but we really need to be mindful about when we're having that interaction. There is a time and a place for that. And unfortunately, outdoors, lunchroom, transitions, things like that, if students are involved and we're in charge of overseeing their safety and their education, then that's a time to be focused on that. And it's not a time to be focused on on new recipes that we're trying, or new activities or new places we're looking to go visit, or things, or any type of small conversation with each other. And I say that honestly and admittedly that I am one of those people, right? Like, I get so much from other adults. The extrovert in me right now is dying a slow death, being stuck at home and not being able to interact in the same way. So I just think that when we do return back to having our students in our presence and interacting with them, keeping this on the back of your mind around when is the time to be overlooking and interacting with children, and when is the time to be interacting with our colleagues, and just being really mindful of that.
100%. There's also, I wanted to point out on the registration page where everybody registered for our sessions, at the bottom of that, there are resources for kind of, there's other professional development opportunities that are on your own time, that sort of thing. And there's one there, it's actually a Head Start one, but it's on teacher to teacher talk. It's a really great training because it not only talks about how teachers should be communicating with each other in the classroom, but it's also talking a lot about the modeling that teachers are doing. So it's about talking positively to each other and how do we get through situations when the children are around that might be a little tense, when we don't agree, that sort of thing. So if anybody has time to check that one out, I would highly recommend it. Okay, so we're going to move on. So the next one we're going to talk about is, I got to move my pictures again. Okay, we're going into understanding children's behavior, and there's a couple of different pages on this one. So the first thing we're going to talk about is anticipate. So basically that's being proactive, and it's knowing your children. We talked about this at the very beginning of one of the 6 strategies. So it's knowing your children, the best way to be proactive around supporting and anticipating and knowing when to step in. So getting to know your individual children to predict what they may do in certain situations. And I think everybody who works with children probably knows already that this does not take very long to do. Every child is different. Every child reacts differently to different situations. And I think it doesn't take us very long to kind of understand and know which children need a little more support and know when we need to step in. It's not always that simple, but it's usually pretty quick to figure that out. Also being proactive around gathering information from daily visual health checks and family conversations. So those are important because a visual health scan can tell you if a child is coming in with a stuffy nose or if they have a cold or maybe they look tired and they may need a little extra support that day. Talking to families and parents, if you're seeing them at drop off and pick up also, they may, we had a crazy morning, we missed breakfast, we got up late, that sort of thing. My child hasn't eaten, which obviously is going to probably set them off for some challenging behaviors possibly. So again, they may need some extra support. So that's just some data you can collect very simply that helps you understand how those kids are coming in that morning and how you might need to be proactive around your understanding their behavior. And then also understanding challenging times in your schedule. So being aware of potential hazards around these times and remembering that zoning we talked about is really, really important. So I think some of the most challenging times that you may find in your daily schedule are going to be transitions, very chaotic. We all know that. Sometimes walking down the hallway. It's also very important when you're doing that sort of transition that you have one adult in the front of the line and one adult in the back of the line. If you're walking down the hall, kids are behind you, talking, that sort of thing, you're not seeing your kids, you're not supervising them. So that's really important and can be very challenging. Meal times also can be very challenging. It's another time, I think we talked about outdoor time, and what Nicole was just touching on is it's another time where adults can kind of sit and maybe they want to talk, but ultimately, again, and this goes on also onto class positive interactions, is it's incidentally another time where adults should be really engaging. There's a lot of really great conversation to be had during mealtime, whether you're talking about food, nutrition, health, what the children were doing that day. It's kind of their time to have those conversations with you, which is very important. There was something else I wanted to add and it just completely slipped my mind. Oh, another challenging time in your daily schedule is when that schedule may change. So if you had, a special coming into the classroom or a visitor who had to cancel last minute, or it's raining outside, you can't go outside, it's really important to understand that that can be a trigger for a lot of children if they're not knowing what's happening in the daily schedule. So setting that up, being proactive around keeping them on task, keeping them so they know what's coming next, they know those changes ahead of time, can be very helpful in, having those challenging times not be so challenging. Moving on to listening. Oops, sorry, I hit the wrong button. So knowing what specific sounds or lack of specific sounds in the classroom may signify is very important. So one of the things I wanted to call out there is maybe if you have a bathroom in the classroom or right outside the classroom and it's super quiet is a time that you may want to make sure that everything's okay. So that would be a lack of a sound. Or rest time. Children still need to be supervised during rest time. So even if they're not making any sound, they may be asleep, but make sure that you always have an eye on them. And then of course, specific sounds that you're hearing, whether there's incidents about playing with toys or, different things. So it's always knowing what those specific sounds might mean, what they may sound like, that sort of thing. and then utilizing other strategies as needed for safety. So a couple of things there. Another strategy may be a door chime if you have a child who might bolt and go for the door or elope, that sort of thing. It's really important to have a strategy around something that will clue you into what's happening if you can't be by the door all the time, because that's really hard to do. And then another one, and this is kind of in classroom setup, but using the mirrors for seeing around corners, placing them strategically so those no longer are hiding spaces or areas where children, where you don't have to hear the sound because you can see them, which is a good thing.
So Marcy, really quick, a few minutes ago, you mentioned a teacher-to-teacher resource. I believe it was a Head Start. Can you say the title of that again?
Sure, it's called Teacher-to-Teacher Talk. It's on the ECLKC, the eClick Office of Head Start official site, but there's a link to it on that sign up registration page where everybody registered for these sessions. They have, there's actually some fun tools. It's a whole presentation, and there's some downloads and activities you can do as a team, which I have actually done the training for teams before, and they found it really, really helpful. It's kind of like adult triggers and that sort of thing. It's less around talking around the kids, but it's more the adults talking back and forth.
Great. And there was another comment too around sort of shifting back and forth, my apologies, but what we were just talking about, anticipating and understanding children's behavior, and how much it depends on the plan in place for the student, right? So sometimes there are times when staff is present, but stepping back to allow more peer engagement and or independence for that student. Maureen had mentioned that. So it's a great point that you bring up. Many students that we work with on a day-to-day basis do have very specific goals that they're working towards, be it a 504 plan, be it an RTI goal, an MTSS goal, an IEP goal, and being mindful of that and knowing when to step in and when to step back is going to be really important. And that is not an easy task that's learned. That's something that comes with time, and it comes with guidance and coaching, and it comes with just building that relationship with your student and that trust with your student to know when you need to be sort of on top of their behavior or to avoid triggers for their behavior perhaps, and when it's safe to sort of back off and let them independently navigate what's happening. So great point, Maureen. Thank you.
Yeah, I like that. We're actually going to touch on that on the next slide, but yeah, that's a huge, very important point. Okay, so engagement and redirection and understanding behaviors, which is a lot of what Nicole and I think Maureen were just talking about. So engaging obviously is positive interactions and conversations that help keep children's interest to the task at hand, or keep them interested in the task at hand. And then redirection would obviously be directing children to a new or different place or position within the classroom, outside the classroom, that sort of thing. So we're talking about knowing when to offer support. This is giving opportunities for children's independence, and what Nicole was just talking about, knowing when to step in and to offer help. And we'll get to that a little bit on different levels of assistance, but it can be very difficult to know when to step in and when not to step in. But remember always that the goal, even with children with specific plans or specific goals, the goal in the pre-K classroom is really to nurture that regulation, autonomy, and independence. So we can actually, we'll go down to offering different levels of assistance. It all kind of goes together. A lot of children, 4 and 5-year-olds, have words to say. If a toy was taken from them, they do have the words to say, I was playing with that, and some of them do have that regulation and they can do that, others cannot. So it's really okay, once you get to know your children, you'll know who can do that and who can't. It's 100% great to say, use your words. You could tell your friend that, and then give them the actual language to say, because they may not have the language. They may not have been in that situation or anywhere that they've heard that before. So you can give them the language to use with different levels of support, visuals, brief solution ideas. And a lot of times if you're bringing up ideas or solutions to social problems, you can then ask them if they can help you. I think maybe you could wait and take your turn. What do you think? What's an idea that you have? That sort of thing. And then also remember, it's incredibly important when you are stepping in to give different levels of support and offer assistance in social situations, not only waiting to get involved, which is the second bullet there, letting them attempt to solve problems on their own before stepping in, and being sure to position yourself to be ready to step in to offer support in case things escalate. But when you are offering support, allowing the children and giving them 10 to 20 seconds to, or maybe even longer if they need it, to think through your suggestions, to think about their own suggestions, and then instead of just quickly answering for them or questioning them, that sort of thing, they do need time to kind of process what the information that you're giving them, because again, a lot of times it's 100% brand new to them. And then just to remember that it's the independence and autonomy that we're really working on teaching these children. And then redirection with activities of interest. So again, knowing the child's interest in what's going to capture them is really important. If you have a situation where you need to have a child go to a different area, they're having a hard time in one area, or they're having a hard time lining up or in transitions, having a specific job or activity, a positive reinforcement, and that you can offer these children, so that may redirect them, get their mind on something else, and then they can follow through. It's also really important that there are plans in place around those, because if the adults in the classroom are not consistent, then there's a lot of confusion to the children or the classroom. So again, if you're doing something or saying, you know, you have a hard time walking down the hall, Marcy, maybe you want to take this car and you can keep your hands with the car so you're not touching people, that sort of thing. And then let everybody else in the classroom or the other adults know what the plan is. And so somebody else isn't saying, we don't take cars out of the classroom, we need to put that away. And then the child's confused, and just making sure everybody's on the same page. These are plans that you can talk about before the situation. But if it's a situation that happens quickly, just let the other adults in the classroom know, this is the plan. This is what Marcy and I have decided on. She's going to take the car. We're going to walk down to the cafeteria. As soon as we get there, I'm going to put it in my pocket. This is what we're doing. And sometimes that little 5-second conversation, that little one thing they can hold, is all they need to kind of redirect them and get their attention and follow through with the task at hand. And then another tool there would be to be proactive, knowing that you may have a situation, and bring an item of interest that you can redirect the child to. So if we know that Marcy has a hard time in the lunchroom, maybe we'll bring a book. So when she's done eating quickly and everybody else still has 10 minutes and she's having a hard time sitting, that we have this book that she loves so she can sit and look at this book at the lunchroom. And that's just being proactive around redirecting and helping that child through that transition and understand that that's where they need to be and to follow the task at hand. Any questions or comments?
So there's one sort of question / comment. So when talking about a student, though, shouldn't we be sure that no other student can hear conversations?
Can you read that one more time?
Yes. When talking about a student, shouldn't we be sure that no other student can hear conversations? So if I'm understanding correctly, Lisa, it sounds like you're referring to when you as an adult are speaking with another adult about a student and their needs, to be sure that that's a private conversation and other students can't hear. So unless if you comment otherwise, correct, okay. It could trigger, yes, okay, perfect. So yeah, I think that that's an important note, absolutely. So this gets back to sort of FERPA regulations as well, right? The conversations that you have on any child with another adult is and always should be a private conversation between the two adults, especially depending on the content that you're discussing. So it's never a time for other students to be involved in those conversations for obvious reasons, right? It doesn't pertain to them. For lack of a kinder way of saying it, it's not their business. So it sort of needs to be something that's mindful between the two adults interacting. So if that conversation can be had during a time when other students aren't around, before the school day, after the school day, via email, something like that, then that's certainly what we would recommend. But as you all well know, things happen in the middle of the day that weren't planned, and conversations need to be had often on the spot. So just stepping away and being mindful of that is an important reminder. Other students are present, exactly. Yes, Dorothy, thank you. Yeah, and the other thing about that too is I know a lot of Maine communities are small rural locations, right? Everybody knows everybody. So it can be really easy to be out and about after school or out and about on the weekend, bump into Marcy at the grocery store and start up a quick conversation around how the work week went with so-and-so or at the school, etc. So really being mindful of shutting down those conversations quick out in public. They also tend to happen if you bump into your student's parent or caregiver out and about in public, and you know, the parent wanting a quick update on how their child is doing or how their child reacted to, you know, the all school assembly or whatever the case may be. And just reminding them that that's something you're happy to talk about over a phone call or through an email, or perhaps you could set up a time to meet. But the grocery store, the post office, the gas station is not a time or place to be discussing any students' you know, behaviors through the school.
Okay, we are going to move on to the 10 actions to engage in a culture of safety. So the 10 actions are listed. I'm just going to give some quick guidance around each one of them. The first one is use data. So schools have school program and incident data serves as an important resource to help school staff ensure children's safety. You can use data on times of day. If there's a special time of day, certain transitions, certain rooms, certain pieces of equipment that may be broken, that sort of thing. It's all data you can collect, so you can use that to kind of inform you and rearrange schedules or rearrange whatever you need to rearrange. Actively supervise, that's what we were just talking about, so children are never left alone or unsupervised. Staff are positioning themselves so they can observe, count, and listen at all times. Keeping environments safe and secure. Staff are creating, monitoring, and maintaining clutter and hazard-free spaces, which includes any sort of chemicals or dish soap or anything that children might get into. Don't ever assume that they won't. It should all be out of the children's reach. Making sure playgrounds are kept safely and outdoor spaces are safe. So regular inspection, maintenance, age appropriately, and then actively supervised when you're outdoors. This allows children to engage in active play, explore the outdoors, and develop healthy habits. Really good rule of thumb is if you, depending on where your playground is, if you can do it on your way in the morning, a quick visual check. A lot of playgrounds are utilized after school by, I mean, not at the moment they're not, but in general, after school and by families, they're kind of public spaces. Things can be left behind, things that we don't want to think about, and then other things such as water bottles or, you know, maybe somebody dropped a piece of gum, and those are things that visually you can see, take care of really quickly, and then there's no hazards for the children when they do go outside. Transportation of children safely. We didn't really touch on this, but obviously there's a lot of programs in schools that do bus their pre-K students and older students. So most schools are, I think they're required to implement and enforce policies and procedures for bus monitors, bus drivers, and then for families that drop off and pick up times, which I believe families are notified of and discussed with them. Everybody is, number 6, report abuse and neglect. So everybody's mandated reporter. It's just really important to follow the specific policy that your school has in place, remembering that all staff and family members are guardians of children's safety, and that's something that we take very seriously. Number 7, being aware of changes that impact safety. So being aware, anticipating, preparing for children's reactions to transitions in school, transitions and changes in daily routine, both at school and at home. So we talked about how changes in the daily schedule can be triggers for some children. They can make unsafe situations. Also keep in mind that if there are things going on at home that we may not know about, so good family engagement and talking to families. Hopefully they're keeping you updated if anything big is happening, but those can be things that you can anticipate and prepare for, which is great. Modeling of safe behaviors. So staff are establishing nurturing positive relationships by demonstrating these safe behaviors and encouraging other adults and children to try them. So remember always that everything you do during the day, children are watching you, and they are sponges. And so they hopefully are taking, well, most of the time they are taking that information, even if you think they're not paying attention. And if we're modeling positively and showing them how we can be safe and how we should talk to people and how we're being positive, they're gonna learn those things through the modeling. Educating and teaching families. Educating families about safety issues and partnering with them on how to reduce risks and what we're doing at schools, outside, inside, on buses, so they know the procedures, drop-off, pickup times, that sort of thing. And also a really good rule of thumb is to talk to families about what they're doing at home for safety purposes. So we talked about, having safe, secure environments. It's also important for families at home to have safe, secure environments. So their dish soap and their bleach is kept out of reach, and, different things that we may not deal with at school, or we may just assume that people know. Don't ever assume that everybody knows everything, because 9 out of 10 times they just don't. And so that's when things happen on a safety level. And then we've talked a lot about knowing your children. So planning activities, which is what we do, with an understanding of each child's development levels and abilities, preferences, culture, and traditions of their families. We are 100% moving children up in their goals, but also knowing kind of the levels where they're at, meeting them where they're at, so we're not starting them off in a negative space. If that makes sense. Okay. And so the final slide, we're going to do a quick little on our own activity. So I'm going to have 3 scenarios here. I'm going to read the following scenarios one at a time, and then I'm going to give you guys a minute or so to kind of reflect individually on what these things currently look like in your practice, in your classroom, and consider what you could do to change or to help create a culture of safety around these things. Because we have, I think, 146 people on, we're not going to take time to share individual thoughts. If you want to, I would write things down, take it with you. I know we're not in buildings right now, so it's good things to have for next year. Okay, so number 1, thinking about your classroom. Are there blind spots or hiding places that we spoke about? And if these can't be rearranged, how can you supervise children around these areas in your classroom if you have them? So take about a minute and a half, and take some notes, think about this. And then I'll pull you back together for number 2. Okay, so I can't see everybody. It's been about a minute. I can see 3 people, so I'm going to assume everybody is done. So if you're not, again, these will be recorded. You can come back to it. Number 2, while you're sitting with a student at the writing table, arguing suddenly begins in the dramatic play area. So I would like you to reflect on maybe a specific child that you're working with. I want you to think about clear pathways, redirecting, zoning, and maybe the most problematic centers and areas in your classrooms that you had this past year, and what tools you can use to engage positively while also remembering independence and autonomy for the children. So go ahead and take a minute or so and think about those things. Okay, and moving on to number 3. Every day at outside time, there are 3 children who always want to be the most coveted job as the line leader. Marcy has a particularly hard time when it's not her turn, and she lies on the floor crying and refusing to move. So what I would like you to do is kind of reflect on that situation, because I'm sure that if it's not the line leader, it's probably another job in the classroom. I want you to think about redirection and engagement and how to be proactive in a situation like that, because it's occurring almost every day. Positive reinforcement, and then again, staff zoning in situations like that. Okay. I'm just doing a quick scan. It looks like some people are still writing, so we'll give you a couple more seconds to wrap that one up. And again, this will be obviously recorded and will eventually be posted in a place that will let everybody know where it is when that happens. And you can revisit this, you can look through the information, that sort of thing. So the next one is just questions. If you have any questions that you would like us to answer, you can put those in the chat room now and we'll address as many as we can. We have about, it looks like 10 minutes or so left in this session. And so if we need to stay a few minutes, we can do that. If not, you can put everything in the chat room. We'll be able to look at that later.